Hi, everyone, and welcome back to MLSecOps Connect, Ask the Experts, an online MLSecOps community series where we field questions from all of you, community members, for a series of expert guests that we invite on the show. So what you're about to watch is a recording of a live stream that we held earlier today with our expert attorney guest named Scott Giordano, who is a senior AI, privacy, and cybersecurity attorney based in the Seattle area. Scott has more than 25 years of legal, technology, and risk management consulting experience. He most recently served as general counsel of Spirion LLC, a privacy technology firm. There, Scott served as the company's subject matter expert on multinational data protection and its intersection with technology, export compliance, internal investigations, information governance, and risk management. Scott is a member of the bar in Washington State, California, and District of Columbia. Let's jump right into our conversation with Scott Giordano. Well, thank you so much again for being here with us today and agreeing to share some insights with the community. And thank you all for being here and watching. This community includes members in various roles and at different stages of their careers. We received a lot of great questions for Scott. And it's a range. There are no silly questions. We're all in this community to learn together, and the questions that were submitted do reflect that. So we've got some pretty interesting stuff to dig into today. We'll try to power through all of it within the next 40 minutes or so. If you do have additional questions, or if Scott mentioned something that you'd like to double click on, please feel welcome to drop your additional questions into the live chat, and we'll save time at the end to try to answer one or two of those. So let's dive in and start with maybe some broad strokes before getting into more specifics. Okay. So one of the questions submitted by the community, thank you so much, we're just getting down to the basics. Are there any cybersecurity laws or regulations that apply to AI?
In a sense, they all do. So you think about what the typical cybersecurity regulation is going to demand. It's going to demand that you protect the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability of the system in question and the data inside it. And that's true of all 50 states in the US have that requirement that you have to protect that data. Also, the federal government has it in different capacities. They also have it at very narrow capacities, like with HIPAA, with banking regulations. So the short answer is that any law that applies to IT security applies to AI security as well. That said, we're now slowly starting to see some laws or some regulations that are AI specific. So for example, last October, the president issued an executive order that was very lengthy. I think it was like 8,700 words on AI. And one of the requirements now is that developers of AI have to conduct red teaming on certain AI systems and have to then share those results with the federal government. So we're starting to see the very, very beginning of AI-specific regulations, but by and large, vast majority of cybersecurity regulations already apply to AI.
Beautiful. Scott, how do you see the regulatory landscape developing, evolving as it regards to AI and cybersecurity, maybe at a federal level for the US and then also globally?
I think it's interesting because I think the global part is actually going to come first before the federal level. So what we saw with the General Data Protection Regulation, so the GDPR, this was the privacy regulation that came down about 4, 5, 6 years ago. And what happened is that when GDPR was being promulgated, then the states in the US started picking up on it. So right after GDPR, I think it went live in 2018. Right after that, the California Consumer Privacy Act went live. And so what happened is that got the ball rolling, and then other states started picking it up and started adding it. And I mean, we're still not at a point in the federal level where we have a national privacy law, but about 20 states right now have their own state privacy laws. And this is the same model now we're going to see with AI. So Europe's passed the EU AI Act. We're going to talk about that in a bit. Now we saw here in Colorado, they passed the first statewide AI regulatory bill. And again, it's not comprehensive. There's some things that still needs to be done, but by and large, it's the first of what I suspect are going to be many. So that's really how the model is going to work. It's going to be what happens overseas, what happens here stateside, and then eventually, I hope the federal government will get involved as well.
Right. Okay, wonderful. And a quick note here, this video will be available on demand later, and in the summary for this particular episode, we will include links to the references that Scott's sharing with us here, so you can figure out how to find some of these resources and policies. What changes to cybersecurity law that are happening now in this evolution would you say are most important for the InfoSec or AppSec crowd to be aware of?
What you're going to find is that we have this whole wave of national or federal breach notification laws. So we already have them in the States. I'm sure all of your listeners know that. But now we have these at the federal level. So in the US, we have something called CIRSIA, which is a breach notification law that is specific to about 16 different industries. Not surprisingly, IT is one of them, but other industries like energy, finance, healthcare, etc. And so what you're going to find is that what's important for InfoSec and AppSec folks is having a very crisp idea of what qualifies as an event versus an incident versus a breach, because each of those has a very particular legal connotation, and you have to get that right. Also, this idea of materiality. The SEC promulgated some rules back last December for breach notification, again, if there's an event. And so what you have to do then is look and see, okay, is that event something that a stockholder of that company would be interested in, would be material? So the net of it is that you have to have a very good understanding of what these words mean and have agreement. And I'll give you an example of what happens when that does not go well. I had a client that I was helping out with a security review. Specifically, it was the SOC 2. And there had been some issues prior to that. And so when we were meeting with the auditors, one of the security team members blurted out that we had had a breach, when in fact that was not the case. It was not a breach. And of course, I had steam coming out of my ears because that's exactly what I did not want the auditors to hear. So I had then explained the whole issue, which was that there was some software that got installed that people weren't expecting to see, and it looked like a breach, and it wasn't. So, but that lack of understanding of what's a breach, what's an incident, what's material, that can bite anyone. And you have to really have that understanding before something bad happens. Because once it happens, if you don't have understanding, then everyone looks like they don't know what they're doing, and it just looks bad for the company.
Yeah, I mean, this wasn't a question submitted by the community, but as you're talking now, can you speak to how organizations should try to get in front of that and create alignment across different teams about how they use those words and what it means? And
I'm a huge believer in tabletop exercises. I know those are things that can be time consuming and expensive and just, onerous to prepare for. But I'll tell you, you really find out what you're made of when there's a tabletop exercise. Because once you do that and you realize that half the team has no idea what a breach is versus what's an incident, people don't know who to call. People don't know just about anything. You'd be amazed at what happens with tabletop exercises. So I think once you do one of those, you realize that you need a policy for all kinds of things you didn't think about before. So, it's a great way. And so I recommend everyone to do that at least once a year. If you haven't done one lately, do one, because you're going to find out what you don't know, and you're going to find out who doesn't know what they should know.
What's an example of maybe a consequence of using the word breach versus incident in a high-stakes situation?
If it's a true breach, legally, you are required, or at least your customers will require you to notify them. And so I know I've written and reviewed umpteen contracts where the counterparty is going to say, if there's a breach, you're going to have to notify us within 1 hour or within 2 hours, whatever it is. And that is something that just the capability of notifying 100 or 1,000 customers that there's been a breach and then providing them with meaningful information is very difficult. And to get anything useful in an hour, it's just not possible. And so, but these are the battles that I've had with counterparties, trying to placate them and saying, look, I understand that you want to be notified if there's a breach, but I can't get you useful information in an hour. I just can't. It's going to take probably 24 hours before we really know what's going on. And so you have to have that. And this is the challenge that you face when you're negotiating these things, is that you have to be able to get useful information, which means you have to be able to prepared to get that information in the first place. So this is, again, going back to TTX's, why being ready is so important. If something's a true breach, then there's a huge legal list of to-dos you have to do that you wouldn't have to do otherwise.
Got it. Shifting a little bit, so as we continue to think about those concepts in the context of AI and that regulatory landscape, you know, there are regulations that are starting to crop up, standards, not a whole lot of law happening. Like, actually, when you think, it's important to differentiate between those words as well. Like when we talk about laws, regulations, policies, standards, those all mean something different. And I'm going to use another word here that was submitted by a community member. Are there already precedents in the context of AI security and or privacy that we should consider? And how I might reframe this is any early attempts at regulation prior to now that have kind of set the stage for what we're seeing now.
I mean, what we have now is we're really going to go to battle with. So there's no, in terms of precedents, we already have our precedents in the sense that we have all kinds of statutes on cybersecurity here in the US. As I mentioned earlier, every state's got one. Federal government has for their own internal operations. They have it for defense contractors. They have it for selected industries. So we already have what we need to go to battle with. It's really an understanding of what's going to be required of us. And so again, this goes back to, do you know what kind of information is going to be asked of you? Because it's going to vary by jurisdiction. And you're going to have to go to all the jurisdictions, line up all the requirements and say, okay, this is what our baseline is going to be. It's going to be this list of things. So in terms of precedent, understanding what the law is asking you to do, asking your organization to do right now, and then being able to address all those things, whatever the most rigid or difficult one is to do, is the one you're going to aim for.
Okay. All right, here's a fun one I've been waiting for. We'll get a little bit into the weeds and more specifics. A community member submitted a question about California Senate Bill 1047, and I'll provide a little bit of context here that wasn't included in the question, but basically the California Senate passed a bill in May of this year, 1047, that some have described as a bill that sets out to regulate AI at the model level, and it applies to models that are trained above certain compute and cost thresholds. And I'll include some notes in the summary for this episode with some more context, but how do you envision regulation or something like SB 1047 being enforced, and what are potential consequences for violating? And then I have a couple follow-up questions.
Sure, absolutely. I think, and 1047 is a fascinating bill. It's been amended many times during the legislative process, because I just reviewed it yesterday, and it's marked up all over the place. So it's very interesting. As you can see, it's winding its way through the legislature, and all the various lobbyists are trying to get it in one direction or another. What it purports to do is that if you have some kind of a critical event or a crisis event where people are injured, so there's an AI that produces something that injures people at some mass scale, or does some kind of significant cybersecurity damage, cyber damage at mass scale, it's going to create an event. There is a purport to be a agency, a frontier model agency. So think about this. There's an actual agency that's going to be in the state government in California that will regulate frontier models, meaning the chat GPTs of the world. And so what's going to happen is they have the power to investigate things like this, the power to issue fines. And then even if they pass on issuing a fine, the state DOJ can then issue a fine. If they want to, they can take them to civil court. Also, Department of Labor can take them to civil court if there are any whistleblowers that have revealed things about this, the problem, the crisis, whatever it was, and they're retaliated against. Then Department of Labor can take them to court. So there's a lot of teeth to this. It's interesting to see how it's going to play out, in the sense that, say something bad does happen, how do you trace that back to a particular LLM? And how do you know that the LLM at the time had the information that was relevant to creating the bomb or the radiological device or whatever it is? So it's very interesting to see how you're going to prove causation with that.
A couple more questions about 1047.
Sure.
What is your take on how it will impact or could impact the pace of innovation in the open source community?
It's potentially very troubling. Now, I read an interview with one of the bill sponsors yesterday where that very matter was brought up, because the idea is that if open source users are potentially going to be held liable for these things, or is it going to be the purveyor? So say you have Llama Llama 2 or one of those kinds that is open sourced. It's given to people using it. If the developer giving it to the open source community, are they going to be held liable? So now the purveyor of this bill is saying, the sponsor of this bill is saying, oh no, we'll make sure that once you've released something open source, it's the community, it's up to the community, it's not up to you if something bad happens. So I'm a little bit skeptical about that. I understand that the folks in Silicon Valley are very skeptical about it. I'm sympathetic to the idea that there has to be some control over these LLMs because they can do all kinds of bad things. In fact, there was a study last year that I found shocking, and I think your audience would as well, where there was a LLM that was tested using some kind of a series of data that was used to prevent, it was pharmaceutical data. And the idea was it was trained on pharmaceutical data, and the idea was that the original purpose of it was to prevent any negative reactions. So what they did was they turned it on its head and they said only create pharmaceuticals that produce negative reactions, not positive ones. So within about 6 hours, it produced like 40,000 different substances that were highly toxic. And this is, yeah, I mean, when I saw that, I said, okay, now I understand why we have this kind of bill in place. And I think it's inevitable that it's eventually going to wind up into law in some form or fashion.
Okay. That transitions well into my next question, and also makes reference back to when you were talking about the model for how AI regulation is going to evolve, and how at one point, especially for privacy, it started in the EU, and then we saw something from California and then the United States. So for 1047, how likely do you think it is that other states or even U.S. Congress will pass a similar bill in the near future?
If that law passes, and I suspect it will, you're going to see other states start copying it.
Sure.
There's no question in my mind that that's what's going to happen. And it's not that I think the existing Colorado law is bad or anything, but this is on a whole nother level. I mean, this is really designed to go after the most dangerous of LLMs. I should probably use air quotes there because I don't know how dangerous they truly are, but I think the point is that if this passes, California has such a good chunk of the economy in the U.S. that other states are going to simply copy it and do their own version, much like they did with privacy law.
Sure, that makes sense. All right, switching gears to the EU. This question submitted by a community member says, what do InfoSec, and I'll add AppSec, professionals need to know about the EU AI Act? Anything specifically that you would...
Yes. What's interesting about the Act, and the Act has just gone live either just in the past couple days or weeks. I know it's...
I think they entered it into the order recently, and then is supposed to be enforced August 1st. Was the last I read.
Yeah, I think it's going to be live August 1st.
Enter into force August 1st.
Yeah. And so what's going to happen is that first up, there's going to be a tiered enforcement schedule. So the apps that shouldn't be out there in the first place. So if you think about AI applications that are used to manipulate people, or they're perhaps creating social credit scoring or things like that, that's going to be eliminated within 6 months to the degree they exist already. After that, there's 24 months where you're going to have just general purpose AI tools that are going to be regulated. And then finally, the final 12 months after that is when you'll see so-called high-risk AI, which is really what the EU Act is all about. Probably 90% of the Act is geared toward what we call high-risk AI. So think about anything dealing with human resources, with recruitment, with training, with essential government services like welfare or schooling or anything of that nature, immigration, administration of justice. Those are all considered high-risk applications. And as a consequence, InfoSec professionals really need to know two things. One is that you have to develop a risk management system. So an entire system around the AI that is just to manage whatever risks might be inherent to it. You have to have a risk assessment, at least one initial risk assessment, and then you're probably going to have to do one every year at a minimum to make sure that no new risks have crept in. And then you're going to have an independent capability of cybersecurity. They lump together, what's interesting, they lump together, I think it was accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity. And they just put those as a category all into itself, which I thought was interesting. And then they also threw in the word resilience. But they didn't really define any of those words. So I think it's interesting that they're mandating that you have cybersecurity, that you have robustness or resilience, whatever that might mean, that you also promote the accuracy of the information. So I think what you're going to find is that there are upcoming standards just for cybersecurity for AI. They're being reviewed right now. One is called ISO 27090. So this is cybersecurity for AI. So it's imagine you had ISO 27001 for AI. That's what allegedly this is going to be. This is in development right now. So this kind of a standard is what I presume you're going to be audited against at some point when it goes live. And so it's important to really get ahead of that now and have a very good idea of what controls you're going to be putting in place. How are you going to test the controls? How are you going to see if they're really working? And what controls you may have missed that you definitely need.
Assessments like that being done within an organization, I imagine there are a number of different stakeholders involved in a process like that for some of our learners early in their learning journey. Do you have recommendations for who forms that kind of core group to start taking a look at this stuff?
I think the AI development team is going to be one of the major stakeholders. It's going to be legal, not surprisingly. InfoSec, to the degree that there's an InfoSec team in that organization. If there's not, there should be. At a minimum, those are the three that should be there, because they're the ones that are going to bear the brunt of anything that goes wrong. Because you think about an AI, once it's out of development, it's into production, and then things start going wrong that you just couldn't anticipate, it's going to fall on legal, it's going to fall on IT and IT security. So, and I mean, just based on my own experience, when something goes wrong, those are the two groups that everything lands on, and so they have to be ready for that.
Can't prepare too much. Okay, switching gears on you again here, Scott.
Sure.
This is more of a legal technical question, as defined by the community member who submitted it. Once personal data is present in a machine learning model, and an example of that for listeners might be, you go to ChatGPT and you're asking it a question or asking it some application, AI-powered application, to help you book a trip, and you enter your name and your date of birth, and personally identifiable information ends up in a model in that way, in other ways. Once that happens, it can, by definition, no longer be completely removed. How do you recommend this situation be handled? Should it simply be completely discouraged and retrieval augmented generation or RAG architectures then be used? Or do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the question is that the questioner is right. Once data is trained into a model, you can't get it out. Okay, you can't reverse, you can't unring the bell. That data is in there. So then it's incumbent upon the purveyor of the model to either do one of two things. Either they're going to have to not use it, which presumably they've spent a lot of money developing these things because they're very labor and energy and just time intensive, or you're going to have to use what are now called LLM firewalls. So this idea of a firewall, something that's preventing from the time you prompt something to the time it gets to the AI to be able to just screen out queries that are going to retrieve that kind of information. And so there is I just learned recently, there's a retrieval firewall to the question about RAG, about retrieval augmented generation. There's an actual firewall just for RAG. There's a firewall for prompting. So you can have something intercept queries that are going to pull back things that they probably shouldn't pull back. And I think it's incumbent upon the cybersecurity community to really learn how to use those things, because no purveyor is going to want to throw away their model. They've spent way too much time on it. They're going to say to cyber, go do something, make it work. We have to sell this thing. We've spent too much money, and the investors are not going to let us throw it away.
Super insightful. Yes. Okay. Wrapping up here with a couple of the last questions submitted by community members via your registration forms, and then we'll check on how live chat is doing. So to kind of wrap all of this up, some thoughts about, there are so many regulations, laws, standards, what have you, sprouting from the ground. What is the best way to stay on the ball, or would you say stay abreast of all of these updates?
I read a ton of stuff every day, not surprisingly, because there's so much to read. There is a newsletter I subscribe to called Applied GAI in Security, and it's really good. It's very in the weeds, so if you're an in the weeds kind of person, you will love this. So I read that, and usually it'll give you a wrap-up of what's happened the prior week in terms of AI security. So I like that a lot. I also am a big fan of Schneer on security. I've been listening, or I guess reading his blog for 30 years now. So it's still very good. He has a lot of very good AI-related topics on it. I just read the most recent issue, and it was very in the weeds in AI security, so I like that a lot. And then IAPP, which is the International Association of Privacy Professionals, they've been prolific with everything AI. I have to say they've done a really good job, and they have their own newsletter. They have an entire database of information just on AI regulations, so highly recommend having a look at those. They're not necessarily cybersecurity specific, though, but they're still very good for understanding where the world is moving in terms of regulating AI.
Okay, thank you. And I had something come to mind after the last time you and I spoke, Scott, as we were prepping for this session. Immediately after that, I was thinking about, there was a tool that an MLSecOps community member shared within our community Slack space, I want to say like 6 months ago or something, that was a neat interactive map where you could go click on different areas around the globe and see what the current regulations and things that folks are trying to get into the works there are. I want to say it was called Plot for AI. Don't quote me on it. I will find it and put it in the summary for this session when we publish the on-demand, but that would be another cool resource to check out.
Okay, I will. Yeah. I mean, there's no shortage of them. Also, I'm a big fan of OWASP. OWASP has put out so much good material on all things. They have a top 10 for LLMs, which is very good. Big fan of that. They have a checklist now they've put together for LLMs, including a legal section, which I was really appreciative of. So big fan of OWASP. They're doing a great job. So a lot of great material out there, probably way more than we can consume.
Yes. We had the pleasure of hosting Sandy Dunn, who is a large part of that checklist project. She came on the podcast not too long ago, and we got to chat about it, and that it is a great resource. OWASP is fantastic. Any other governance frameworks that you might recommend?
You know, there's so many. This is the thing about governance frameworks. I've probably come across, no exaggeration in the past year, I've probably come across 100 of them. Everyone has their own framework. So OECD, which is the organization of something or other, it's like a 50 nation organization that develops. It's a think tank basically of developing nations, and they're famous for putting out a think tank white paper about 30 years ago on privacy that became the basis of our privacy laws. They have one on AI. It's very good. The federal government, they have at least 3 executive orders on AI. Also, the blueprint for AI Bill of Rights was very good, although it was very generic. So there's a lot of material out there. There's so much to pour over. There's just not one in particular I would recommend. You're just going to have to just start reading things and see what you like. It's all good. This is the good news, but it's just finding something that really fits what you're trying to do, I think, is going to be the challenge.
Okay. All right, we have a little bit of time left here. I am going to hop over to Allie and check on any follow-up questions from the community in the live chat. Request for resources. Yes, so after this, I'll say one more time, visit community.mlsecops.com. By mid next week at the latest, we'll have the summary for this episode and all of the resources that we've talked about linked there. Thank you so much. Question from Rico about your reference to reg firewall. Did you have any particular solution in mind, or was there something that you'd seen that?
No, there's not a particular solution I had in mind. It's just that the fact that there is such a thing as an LM firewall, I think is great. I don't know how long they've been around, presumably not terribly long, but the fact that something like that exists, I think is huge. And so it's incumbent upon us really to understand when it's applicable to put those in and to make sure that they're in place, because at some point we're going to have a standard reference for controls that have to be in place for AI. We're not anywhere close to that yet. And there's a lot of good material, but no one's organized that yet.
Okay, got it. Last question from me, and then I think we'll probably wrap up. Okay. Any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with, Scott, or a call to action for this group after they leave this?
I think the call to action is make friends with your legal department, assuming your organization has one. I've been spending time with cybersecurity almost my entire career, and I think that relationship and having a strong relationship with your legal team is so important. Being able to just exchange ideas and to get to know one another, because when something goes wrong, as I said earlier, it's either going to be IT's problem or legal's problem or both.
Sure.
And so it's really important to have that strong relationship. At one point, I used to spend about an hour a day in the CISO's office, because so many things had legal implications that there was just a need for me to brief him on all kinds of things. And that's just the nature of InfoSec right now. And so having that really strong relationship, I think, is gonna bear fruit for everyone.
Okay. And my call to action would be to keep asking the questions. You know, Scott and I were, right before we went live today, we're chatting about how we got a ton of fantastic questions from the community for this session, although I noted not as many as the last session. And I think part of the reason for that is we're still unsure which questions to be asking,
yes,
especially when it comes to all of this. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, there is no question too small. There is no question too complex. Ask them. If the person you ask doesn't know the answer, find someone who does. And keep digging, because this is not a problem that any of us can solve on our own or in silos. With that, I think we're all set.
Wonderful.
Scott, wonderful to have you on the show. We'll include some notes about how to get in touch with you afterward if folks have follow-up questions,
Absolutely.
if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you to the community for being here, and we will see you next time on MLSecOps Connect.